Hey there, I'm Danny Trester from Trester Tailor in Rochester, Minnesota. This is Tailor It Yourself. In this 4-part series, I'm going to show you how to make alterations to a t-shirt. This is part 2, where I'm going to be showing you how to take in the sides on the shirt and put darts in the back. And in parts 3 and 4, I'm going to show you how to shorten the sleeves, put darts in the sleeves, and shorten the hem on the bottom. To do this, you're going to need a couple of tools. You'll need a scissors, a thread nippers or a small scissors, some thread to match your garment, a ruler, a seam ripper or a razor blade, some wax tailor's chalk, and some pins to do your fittings. You're also going to want a sewing machine, a serger or a sewing machine that has a zigzag stitch, and an iron that can output steam. It's possible to do this process with just hand sewing, but it's not going to look as nice or hold up as well as if it would if you used a sewing machine. Welcome back to part 2 of how to tailor a t-shirt. In this one, we are going to be showing you how to take the sides in on an oversized shirt and how to put darts in the back to create shaping. On the first video, we narrowed the shoulders of this shirt so it fits a little bit more to a smaller frame. So if you have a lot of cool vintage tees that are just too big for you, this is how you make them smaller. Okay, so for fitting, we're going to need our tailor's chalk, and we're also going to need pins. So we'll start with taking in the sides, and when we pin the sides, that's going to take excess out of the front and the back of the shirt. So I usually try to kind of start with the waist. I start in the middle and work my way up and down. And you can just pin it to your preference. I generally like a little more taken in through the waist and a little bit more relaxed through the hip area. And if you're pinning this on yourself, it can be a little bit tricky. So if you get kind of a little wrinkles on the sides there, don't be so concerned with that, because when we take the shirt off and lay it on the work table, we'll kind of smooth that out. So don't be discouraged that it doesn't lay completely flat. And sometimes I like to weave the pin in and out. Go through the fabric, back out, and then back in again, because sometimes when you're taking the shirt on and off, pins will fly off and it can make it a little hard, and then you got to put it back on and mark it again. Okay, and you can check your fit as you go along, so we can see how this is kind of, if you imagine these little wings being gone there, it just fits a little bit more to the body. And then it gets a little trickier as we go up. And then how's that there? That's looking pretty good. Do this side here. And depending on how your shirt fits, sometimes you just have it fits overall, but it's just a very straight fit. Sometimes you just want to take it in the waist just a little bit. Also, putting darts in the back will achieve the same thing, and I'll get to that in a moment. But for this one, because it is kind of big all over, I'm going to continue taking this up through the sleeve. Otherwise, you could just go up to wherever you need it. If it's just the waist, go from here to here. Or if you don't want to take it in, you need the room in through the hips, you don't have to go that far. You can stop here. So this is just kind of showing you the technique that you can apply to your specific situation. It doesn't have to look exactly like what I'm doing. So I'm going to put a pin under the arm here. Take that in a little bit. There we go. And then I'm going to put one through the end of the sleeve. And this is going to be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you got to do it with one hand. I'm having a hard time here. Okay, you can kind of see the differences in the sleeve. This one is a little bit more closer fitting to the body, and this one's a little looser. That's because I've pinned it through the underarm. So you can kind of see how that's going to fit there. This one I am not going to attempt to do it because it's even harder. Well, maybe let's give it a try. If I stretch it enough. And this can be applied to both long sleeve and short sleeve shirts. If you have a long sleeve, you'll just, depending on how far you want to go, if you just stop at the arm, armpit. Otherwise, if you know the sleeve is a little full, you can just pin down the sleeve to the cuff. Or if the cuff is really wide too, you can pin through the cuff. It's all kind of one seam. We're just gonna zip the whole thing. So, all right, you can kind of see how this is fitting a little better. The sleeves are taken in a little bit more. It's fitting a little bit more to my body. But one other thing that I want to do, and you can do this in the front or the back, is add darts. If you're not familiar with what darts are, they are basically little seams that will create, that take out little wedges of fabric, and it allows you to create shaping where sometimes the fabric doesn't want to curve around that. That's how you get shaping, is by adding darts. I generally like to put them in the back just because it'll curve a little bit more to the small of my back. Right now it's hanging pretty straight. So this is a little bit tricky to pin on yourself. So if you have someone that can help you, that's helpful. But otherwise, I kind of just rough pin it, and then I mark with my chalk where I want it to stop and start. And then when I get to the work table, I'll rearrange my pins and make it laying a little flat, and then I'll mark it for how we're going to alter it. So let me see if I can do this. So I just want a little bit through the waist here. So I'm going to take my pin, and this is going to look real silly, but just that one little pin there. And then I'm going to turn to this side, and I'm going to pin one there, and I hope you guys can see that. So if you kind of imagine these little bits being down, it's going to curve a little bit more to the small of my back there. And then I'm going to take my chalk, which is in my pocket, and I'm going to make a little mark, because I don't want to go past a certain point, because I want to leave room in the hips. So I'm just going to mark on the fabric, just like so. And I'm going to do one on this side as well. Let's see, about there. And it doesn't have to be perfectly even. We can even that out and readjust our marks once we get it on the table. And then I'm also going to mark, if I can, up top. I'm just gonna, if we should had Inspector Gadget arms, I'm just gonna mark it here, about there, if you can see that. So you can see this is where I'll start, take it in that amount, and that's how much I'll stop. So this is looking real rough and ready right now, but once we smooth that out, it'll become more evident, and I'll explain that more later. Okay, so we've got everything pinned in. We're going to take the sides in through the bottom of the hem here, through the sleeve. Going to zip that all out of there. And then we're going to add some shaping in the back by adding these darts in there. So next we'll lay this on the table. We'll kind of smooth the pins out a little bit and get it marked and ready to sew. Alright, so we're back at the work table, and we've got our shirt with all our pins in it. First thing we're going to do is kind of straighten these out a little bit. They, you know, aren't perfectly, you got a little twist in here, and that happens when you're pinning it on yourself, which is fine. So we just want to make sure that we use our ruler and kind of measure from the edge, or you know, you can eyeball it too, but if you got a little twist in there, you can measure from the edge and just kind of, because this isn't evenly divided on the seams there. So it's about 7/8 of an inch on the fold. So I'm going to take the pin out, I'm going to flatten that out, and then remeasure where I was, and put the pin back in there. And it removes that twist, so when we mark it, it's going to be evenly marked on the front and the back of the shirt. So we'll just kind of keep doing that, going around. Okay, so you can see this side versus this side. This side is all nice and smooth. This side has, you know, some twisting in it, so we'll just continue on so that we make sure we get everything nice and flat. All right, so we're looking at the back, and we've got our start and stop points, and then our marks, our pins for our darts in the middle. first thing we're going to want to do before we mark this on the inside is even out our darts so that they're centered and symmetrical on the back, and then our start and stop point, when we flip that inside out, we want to make sure we get them at the same spot. So I don't want to go too far down because I want to leave room for the hips, and I don't want to go too far up because then it gets too tight in the bust. So we're just going to between those 2 points. So then I'll take my ruler and I'll measure from the sides, and whichever one is further in is the one that I'll move out. So this side here is about 6 inches from where I got my pin to where my side seam is going to be, and this one is about 4 3/4-ish. So I'm going to, on this side, mark 4 3/4 so I know where to move it to, and then I'm going to take this, before I take this pin out, I'm going to measure. It's about 1/2 inch on the fold, so 1 inch total. So I'm going to take that out, and then I'm just going to repin it over here, like so. So now when I measure that, so we've got about 4 3/4 in the seam, and this one is about 4 3/4 in the seam. So when I mark that on the inside, and this one's a little further down, I'm going to move this one up just a hair. So now our darts are symmetrical from the sides, and they'll be nice and even. So we're going to flip the shirt inside out, and then we're going to take our tailor's chalk, and we're going to mark along those pin lines. Some people, when they fit these, they fit the shirt inside out. I don't recommend doing that. Meaning when you're wearing it, it's inside out, and then you put the pins in that way. I don't recommend doing that because you can be different from one side of your body to another. And it also makes an extra step because you still have to put the marks on the inside of the garment. So I like to do it this way, and that way the pin goes through, and then you can just mark both sides at the same time. And you can see our serging stitching here from when we narrowed the shoulders. So we'll just continue onto the other side, marking the sides. This seam looks a little bit different because this is the one where we zigzagged it instead of using the serger. And then we've got our darts on the back. So we'll mark that. So now that we've got each pin marked, I'm going to flip it right side out again. And then I'm going to take the pins out. And we got my dart pins. And again, we're going to flip it inside out one more time just so that you can see what it looks like. So here we have all our marks. We've got our sides marked on both sides for how much to take that in through the arm. And then we've got our darts marked in the back here. If you didn't mark it perfectly, you can go through and add it. So then I'm just also going to flip this, and these were our little marks where we did our start and stop point. So I'm just going to kind of even that out a little bit, or you could take your ruler and measure up from the bottom. So it was about 3 inches, and then I'm just going to kind of pinch that and use it as a marker on the inside. And then we had one up further up here, and I'm just going to pinch that one and kind of use my chalk against my finger on the other side to create a darker line. So now we've got our marks on the inside. I suppose I could flip this around. All right, so you can see how our darts are kind of taking shape a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball the other side here. So what's going to happen when we sew these darts is, I'm just going to make it more prominent. We're going to start here, and it's going to kind of take out these little wedges here. If you can see those marks there. And essentially what that's going to do is just cinch in that little bit at the back so that it doesn't change anything above here and below here. It just brings the waist in a little bit more in the back to provide a little bit more shaping. Okay, we've got this all marked out. Let's take it to the sewing machine and take in some seams. All right, we're here back at the sewing machine, and before we start, again, if you missed part one, we just want to make sure we set the stitch length to be a little bit longer than we typically would with woven fabrics or other kind of regular weight fabrics. We want a little bit more ease in the seams for the stretchier fabric. And if you can, use a ballpoint needle, which is going to help with skipping stitches, and it'll keep the needle from piercing holes into the fabric. Sometimes with certain knits, a sharp point needle will put little holes. So if you ever need to take anything out, let something out, make adjustments, you don't want to have holes when you take that seam apart. So those are my recommendations, but if you have what you have, you have what you have. So we are going to start with our side seams, and you could either start from the sleeve side or from the bottom side. It doesn't matter. In this case, it really doesn't matter because I am both going to be shortening the sleeves and doing the hem on this shirt. But if you're just doing the sides and nothing else, the one thing you really want to make sure you do is that you get your edges, whether it be at the bottom or at the edge of the sleeve, get them perfectly lined up. That way you don't have to take the hem apart and try to get that all lined up. If you magically get these sides to line up just so, it's just a lot quicker and easier, and you'll have a much cleaner look to it. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to make sure that these are perfectly lined up. And I'm going to slide that under the machine so that my first mark is lined up with where the needle is on the sewing machine. So on this one, it looks about 5/8 from the edge. So we're going to stitch forward a little bit and go back to reinforce it. So we're just going to follow along on our chalk marks along the shirt. And we also have ones on the back for reference. And we'll just zip that right up. And you don't want to pull the top or the bottom either one way. You want them both laying nice and flat, not accounting for any ease like we did on the shoulder seam. And I'm approaching the edge of my sleeve here, so I'm just going to make sure I get them just lined up just perfectly. And then I'm just going to clip my ends there, and we can see our nice seam there, and there's a little bit of ease in there, so we can move and stretch with it. If you decide you're going to sew this by hand, that's one of the trickier aspects of doing things by hand, is that it doesn't build in the same amount of flexibility in the seam. So if you do this by hand, you might find that you're just popping seams a little bit more often than you would if you were using a sewing machine. All right, so then we will switch to our other side, and then again I'm going to start at the bottom just because that's my preference, but you could go the other way. And I got my bottoms lined up just perfectly. And I'm not going to catch my tag in there because I'm just going to cut that off and get rid of it. And I'm just following my chalk marks. I'm making sure that my edges are lined up because I'm getting close to where we're going to stop. I'm passing right through those shoulder seams. I'm just back tacking, and then I'll clip my threads at the start and the stop. And if we unfold this, you can kind of see how they line up just so. Lines up just so. So that'll give us a nice clean look on the edge, and then we don't have to worry about taking these overlock stitching out, because trying to replicate that is ugh. So if you just line them up exactly right, then you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so we've got our side seams sewn, and now we're going to do our darts. It doesn't really matter what side you start on, but I do recommend starting from either the bottom on both or the top on both, just so that they're going the same direction. So what we'll do is, so we've got our dart going horizontally here. So what we'll do is at the start and stop point, pinch that and kind of fold it on the line where our middle mark is, if that makes sense. So we want to lay this down so that the same amount is on either side of where our mark is. And then I'm going to start from the bottom, and we've marked our stop point. So I'm going to put the needle there. And you want to kind of angle it just a little bit. So I've got this kind of tip this way so that when I'm sewing, I'm going into the shirt. Otherwise, it'll just go straight. We don't want that. But we also don't want to go all the way to bottom. So there's just like a very slight angle that we can ease into. If you do it too aggressively, you'll get a little bubble at the start and stop point. So if you just angle it slightly this way, slightly this way, it'll kind of angle into the shirt and have a nice crisp start and stop point. And I'll show you what I mean when we get that far. So I'm just going to sew forward a little bit, go backwards, and I'm going to go backwards off of the fabric. This allows me to get a nice crisp point that runs right off the fabric. And then I'll go forward again, and I'm going to, and you can kind of see I have this little line here. I'm going to slowly ease into the shirt until we get to the same point where our marks are. And I'm just going to make sure that we have this shirt horizontally correct. Because sometimes what happens if you have it rolled slightly to one side or the other, when you look at the shirt, instead of it being up and down like this, they'll be slightly, cockeyed. So we don't want that. So we want to try to make sure we get this as parallel as possible. And then once you get to the full point, then we're going to kind of slowly taper back to our stop point here. Nice and easy, and basically just so that there's no fabric, we're going to run off fabric, back tack it, and reinforce it. And that's how you sew a dart. And then I just want to show you what it looks like. So we'll flip the shirt inside out. And you can kind of see this little seam we have right there. And there's that little blip at the end that'll be smoothed out once we press it. But so far this is looking nice and even. So now we'll sew all the other side. And we've got our start and stop point already marked. So again, we'll kind of, where the start and stop points are, kind of hold that up, shake it a little bit. Make sure we get it even, should say side to side, so that our marks on here, the fold is even, so that our darts, the seams of our darts stay symmetrical in the back. And then again, we'll put that in and we'll kind of angle it this way, and then we'll go forward a little bit, run off the fabric, just so that we get that very precise point at the bottom. And then we'll follow that line up to our wide point, and then we'll start tapering back. And I'm just going to readjust, make sure everything's nice and smooth. I didn't follow this chalk line here because that was just a demonstration of what the dart potentially looks like when I was drawing it on the table. If I would have taken that in here and then tried to stop right where I had my stop mark, you would end up with a little bit of a bubble right here on the outside. So you want to make sure you get these smooth transitions so that after you've done and you've pressed it, it lays nice and smooth. Otherwise, if you don't get right up to the edge there and make it a nice and smooth little line, you'll end up with a bubble on the outside, and that doesn't look very good either. So we're going to turn this inside out. And I'll hold this up for you so you can see we've got our darts in the back. And this is what I'm talking about with the bubble, but it's pretty minimal, and that's going to press out when we get to the end and we press everything. So we've got our darts sewn in there, and we've got our side seams ready to go. So our next task is going to be to cut out the excess on the side seams. There's just a little bit too much fabric in there, for comfortable wear, so we'll trim that out using a serger, or we'll trim it out by hand and then secure the edges with the zigzag stitch on our sewing machine. And I'll show you how to do that the next step. Okay, so here I'm at my serger machine, which if you're not familiar with a serger, it's also called an overlock. machine. It basically uses 3 or 4 threads to stitch, cut, and encase the raw edges all at the same time. It's kind of a fancy machine. Not everybody has one, but if you're trying to, do this in a professional capacity, or you just happen to have one, it's a really nice way to get really clean, professional, finished look on the inside, and it's a lot quicker because it cuts and sews the raw edges at the same time. So it's very quick and easy. So I'm going to take my side seam here, and it doesn't matter which way you go, top or bottom, but I'm going to leave a little bit, maybe about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so that if we do need to let it out or make any small adjustments, there's still a little bit of fabric left on the inside that we can do that. So the bottom is, we're not going to be taking off much, but closer to the sleeve, we're going to be taking off a little bit more there. And I'm using white thread so you can more easily see what I'm doing. Normally I would try to match the garment color a little bit closer. So I've got little gauges on my foot here. I'm basically running the seam that we created into this last mark on the foot there, and that's going to give me a little bit more seam allowance. You can leave a little more, a little less. I just don't want to leave a whole bulky mess, especially under the arms. Then it kind of, you feel that sometimes, especially when it fits closer to the body, it can be uncomfortable. So we'll just run right off the edge and we'll clip it with leaving just a little bit of an extra, a little bit of extra thread there. So now we've done one side with the serger, and you can see how nice and even and consistent that is. If you don't have a serger, no problem. I will show you how to do it with a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine next. It's not as clean, but it will accomplish the same task. Okay, jumping in with an edit here because I filmed this a bit ago and it was totally out of focus. So I just want to reiterate that before you zigzag your side seams here, you're going to want to trim that up because it's not going to trim it like the serger will. So you just want to leave about a 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way through from the bottom to the sleeve. But if you're only just doing a portion of it, you could mimic what's left behind so that you have one even seam allowance through that whole area. But for this one, I did about 3/8, 1/2 inch, kind of depending on where we're at on the sleeve. But just make sure you trim that out before you zigzag it, otherwise you're going to have big, bulky side seams. Okay, back to the action. Before we get sewing, we want to make adjustments to our sewing machine. We want to make sure that the stitch is wide enough so that it comes from the edge of the cut fabric inside so that it doesn't pull out right away. So you want a 1/4 of an inch. Hopefully your machine can go that far. That's about the maximum that mine will do. And then we want about an 1/8 of an inch in between each stitch. So I've got this piece of black fabric here that I've done some testing on. So I'm going to recheck that. So I'm going to select my zigzag. Oops, there we go. And I want to go as wide as I can and about halfway in. So we'll widen that up and test that out. And it looks a little bit too much in between each stitch. So I'm going to narrow that up just a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. It's maybe a little too narrow, so I'm just going to split the difference. Double check. All right, I think that's looking pretty good there. So we have, as wide as we can go, and then about an 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more on this one, depending on if you're pulling the fabric. And that's a good kind of stitch length there. If you can kind of see a little bit better, this is the one we want, because this one was a little bit too much in between. This one was a little too close. That one's a little too far. So we're going to go with this one right here. First of all, we're going to turn the machine once so that the needle position is all the way to the right. And then we're going to, where the edge is, where the needle is, we're going to put that all the way to the right so that when the needle goes over, it'll go into the fabric. So we're going to go forward a couple stitches and then go back. This might be a little tricky on the edge, so you might need to help it along a little bit. And if you got to lift the foot over some seam allowances, and then just kind of feed the fabric through, making sure that the cut edge is all the way to the right. And again, you may need to lift your foot over those thicker seams under the arm. And you can kind of see how that's kind of encasing the raw edges there. Not as clean as the serger, but again, it gets the job done. And I've got a little bit of a roll there, so I'm just going to line that up under the foot. And we'll go along. All right, you can kind of see our progress there. And we're approaching the end, so I'm going to try to get up as close to the edge as I can and then go back a couple stitches to reinforce it. My machine didn't like that too much. Okay, so we've got our serged edge, or excuse me, we've got our zigzagged edge there. And I'll kind of hold it up against the serged edge so you can kind of see the difference between the two. That one, the zigzag is a little smaller, a little less consistent. The serged edge is a little bit more of a cleaner look there. If you're wondering about the darts here, I'm actually not going to remove any of that just because when it's a 1/2 inch or less, I like to leave that in there. Since these were about a 1/2 inch wide, an inch on the fold total. I'm not going to take any of that either just in case I need to remove it. But if you are taking in your shirt a lot and you have darts that are much wider than that, you probably do want to cut some of that out of there. Technically, you don't even have to use a serger or do the zigzag. You can really just cut it out. Over time, you might get some wear on the edges. It's not going to fray like it would a pair of jeans or something that was a woven fabric, but it's always good practice to secure your cut edges. But if you didn't want to bother with this, you could just, trim out some of the excess on the dart, just trim the sides. But yeah, for this one, I'm just going to leave that as is so that I have a little bit of extra allowance in case I need to make adjustments. But we'll do one more step before we're done, and that is going to be to secure the seam allowances on the bottom and on the sleeves, and I'll pop back over to my other machine and show you how to do that. Okay, we're back at the straight stitch machine, and one thing we're going to do before we press it is we're going to tack our side seams. This is going to help everything lay nice and flat and give it just a little bit more of a crisp finish look. So what we're going to do is we've got our shirt here. And right now our side seams are kind of just hanging out doing whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to tuck our seam allowance to the back. And this is the back because this is where our darts are. And then we've got our little tag from our little tail from the serging thread. And we're just going to kind of tuck that in and then kind of fold the corner over of our seam allowance and kind of hold that flat. And you can see how flush this edge is here, and that's exactly what we want. And then we'll slide that under the machine, and then we're going to stitch forward to where we get to the hem stitching and then go back. And you can go back again, and that's all you need to do. And this will kind of hold everything nice and flat. If you had taken your hem apart, this is a step you don't need to do, but since we just kind of went through the hem stitching there and we lined everything up, you'll want to tack your seams. So we'll try the other side. So again, this is our back side because that's where our darts are. So we're going to fold the seam allowance to that side, hold that under the machine, stitch forward and back, and that's all you need to do. So we'll finish the tacking this under the sleeves, and then we'll take it over to the board and give it a press. Okay, I've got my shirt inside out. We're going to slip it over the sleeve board, and you could do this on the flat part of your ironing board as well, or a tabletop surface covered with a towel. That would work too. And we're just going to press the side seams and the darts in the back. And you want to use an iron that has steam. That's going to really help your pressing look nice and crisp. And we'll rotate this to our dart. We want to make sure it's laying nice and flat. We're going to push these press the dart to the outside. This is the inside of the shirt. We're going to press it towards the side seam. And we'll do the same on this guy. And sometimes you want to pull this a little bit because you get a little bit of a pucker at the top. You want that to be nice and smooth. And then we've got our other side seam. This one we did the serging on, so it looks a little bit different. And I'm just going to clip my threads here real quick, get that out of the way. All right, so now I'm going to flip it the other way around just so I can double check everything. And I got the back of the shirt. You can see right here I've got this little bubble right there, so I'm going to lay this down flat on the board. Kind of smooth it out. And I've also got a little chalk mark there. I'm going to make sure that goes away. Just very lightly press that over everything. So you can see how it lays much smoother. Okay, let's go try it on and see how it fits. We're back in the fitting room. I've got the shirt on after we've taken the sides and put darts in the back, and you can see how it fit before was a little bit more roomy, and now it's a little bit more fitted to my body. There's some shaping there, and when I turn to the side, there's just a little bit more curving into the small of my back. This is maybe a little bit looser than what I typically do some other shirts, but one thing I was keeping in mind is that this shirt has a lot of rayon in it. And rayon, especially when you're altering it, you're steaming it, it has a tendency to expand a little bit and loosen. So as soon as I take this home and wash it, this is going to shrink up just a little bit more. So I want to keep that in mind that I don't get it too tight. But yeah, I'm really happy with the fit. It's still got a little bit of movement, a little bit of room in there. But it's giving me a little bit more shape and more fitted to my frame. We took the shoulders in the last video. That's looking great. But there's a couple more adjustments we want to do. I want to shorten up the sleeves a little bit, and then I'm going to hem this, and I'm going to do it in a little bit of a different way than just hemming it straight across. But I'll show you how to do those in parts 3 and 4, and hope to see you then. Hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. For more information, including a recommended tools list and downloadable PDFs, you can see the video description below. Thanks for watching, and hope you subscribe.